This is Rob Tebbutt for Boxing Social. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Kevin Barry, trainer of Joseph Parker. Kevin, we're the next day after Joseph Parker's unanimous decision loss to Dillian Whyte. First things first, thanks very much for seeing me today. How are you?
Good, Rob. I'm good. You know, it's not a lot of sleep, and didn't have the greatest night. And we're just we're mulling over what could have been and what should have been, and it was a very physical fight last night.
Just talk a little bit about that physical fight. Dillian Whyte came, he admitted in the post-fight press conference that his game plan was to rough Joseph up. Is that what we saw last night?
Sure. And that's what we expected from him. You know, he's a very aggressive physical guy, and I knew his best chances were to fight Joe like that. But it was a tough fight. I don't think Joe has ever been in a real war. We had a really tough fight with Carlos Takam a couple of years ago, but it was a tough, fair fight. Last night there were a lot of fouls. There was a lot of roughness. There was one guy who obviously was prepared to do anything to win, and and another guy who was trying to win the right way.
Just touching on that, I mean, I was delighted to sit down with Joe for an extended period of time before the fight, as I know several of my colleagues did, and I think general consensus or general feedback was Joe is such a lovely guy. He's so relaxed. What a wonderful guy. And then on the flip side of that was kind of nice guys finish last. Just want to get your comments on that. Do you feel like Joe maybe needs to add that streak, that edge that maybe will see him through a fight like last night in future?
Well, we talked about Joe bringing out the mongrel in this fight, and I think we saw a little bit of it. But when you talk about mongrels, you talk about the junkyard dog. He is, and I say this in a respectful way, he is a real mongrel. He does everything he has to do to win. If it means he uses his forearm, he uses his elbow, he uses his head, he will pull your head down, he will try and break your back, he will push you over the top rope, he will hit you after the bell, he will hit you after the break, he will hit you in the balls. Okay, when your back's turned, he will hit you in the back of the head. This is about survival. This is a guy who, from all accounts, grew up in the very, very rough way, in the rough streets, where for him, just getting home, not losing your lunch, but getting home with your life each day was survival. A guy who had been stabbed several times, who the story goes he'd been shot, removed the bullet himself. A tough guy who was brought up in the toughest way, and for him that survival technique, win at all costs, fight until the end, really came through last night. And I thought Joe did a great job, put some beautiful combinations together, had Dillian hurt on, I think we had him hurt on 4 or 5 occasions. But, he just, would get him hurt and he would just change gear and keep coming. He was a tough SOB.
That kind of mongrel term, to use your terminology, is that something that can be taught, or is that something that you either have or you don't have?
Well, look, you said before, Joe's a lovely guy. I tell a little story about Joe. Joe's had a great life. He's been brought up by 2 terrific parents. He's a very respectful guy. He's charismatic. Everyone loves Joe. Joe's never had a street fight in his life. Joe's a very accomplished fighter. Anyone that wins a world title is an accomplished fighter. I'm sure Dillian had to fight every single day just to get home. I know myself growing up, I had dozens and dozens of street fights. That was my life earlier on. But Joe has he's never thrown a punch out of the boxing ring in anger in his whole life. And I think we could see that last night. I'd love, and I think there were glimpses of the Mongrel, but I think if we're really going to be competitive at the highest level, we're really going to have to focus more on executing our game plan to the T and really bringing out the Mongrel.
Is that something that you feel that you can do in the gym by, for example, I know you did a lot of sparring with Malik Scott, who is a classical boxer, very skillful, somebody who's been around the sport for a long time. Would it be a case of bringing in more rough house sparring partners? I don't know, potentially making changes to your training camp or the way that you train to bring that out of Joe?
Look, Malik is a boxer, but Malik is also a professional sparring partner who was elbowing Joe, sticking his forearm in Joe's throat, hitting Joe in the back of the head in our recent sparring camp, was laying on Joe. He was doing things similar to what we had last night. So, we were trying to copy the style of Dillian Whyte the best we could. Look, I think that was our fight to win last night. When you take a step back now and it's the day after, and without excuses or anything, there are a couple of pivotal things that happened. How could anyone foresee that after winning the first round, controlling the second round, somehow we get a headbutt in the back of Joe's head that messes up his whole equilibrium, drops him to the canvas. A round that should have been a 10-9 round to us becomes a 10-8 round to Dillian. There's a 3-point spread there, and the next he comes back to the corner, and he's very unsure, and because for a start off he'd never been off his feet, and he didn't know what he'd been hit with. All he knew that something had hit him really hard in the back of the head. And so we got the ice on it straight away. In fact, in the dressing room after the fight, we spent an hour with an ice bag on the back of his head. One of his ears is 3 times the size of the other ear this morning. Rounds 3 and 4, he was just getting his legs back underneath him again. So, but you can't foresee that. But in saying that, it was the style of Dillian. He took the opportunity, whether it was with his forearm or his head. He did what he had to do to win.
Was Dillian Whyte better than you'd anticipated? I'll just let you have your drink there.
I tell you what, I was very impressed with his resilience. I think, as I mentioned before, I thought Joe hurt him, 4 or 5 times, really good. And had we sort of had him standing upright, I thought if Joe had thrown the third punch, we could have had him down. I was impressed with Dillian's jab, and he was sort of, we knew that he lunged with his jab, and Joe was slipping it a few times but not timing any counters. But I was impressed the way it was landing, Dillian's jab, so his boxing skills actually impressed me a little. We knew that he's good at countering, and we had a game plan in place for that. Joe there were times we didn't execute it as well as we should have. Joe was landing good punches and then finishing in front. And then Dillian would come back with his body shots. And obviously I didn't want Joe getting hit with body shots early in the fight.
And we saw something from Joe that we actually saw in the Carlos Takam fight that you referenced earlier, where it seemed to me like Joe seemed to run out of gas a little bit in the mid to late rounds of the fight. How much was that due to Dillian's body work, and how much of that was due to something you alluded to at the press conference, which was the short turnaround in the camp, the initial travelling in the first week of your 6-week training camp?
Well, I think it was a combination of both those things. Look, we knew that that there was risk and reward for this fight. We knew that it was a short camp, but we gambled on it, and and we have to accept that. Hey, it nearly came off, but I said openly I would have liked another couple of 3 weeks. Obviously, those body shots that Dillian was landing were slowing Joe down, just as the body shots that Joe was landing was slowing Dillian down. They were both. They both took each other's energy away. Both guys were tired, and both guys had spells where they looked like they were exhausted. Then they'd come back. But I thought Joe, showed the real heart of a champion. He bit down on his mouth guard and dug really deep in the later rounds of the fight. When we had to win those late rounds, and we came very, very close. To pulling off a huge victory.
Just staying with that, the rally that came in the later rounds of the fight, Joe was down pretty big on all of the scorecards, or certainly on my scorecard at the time. How rewarding is that for you as a trainer to see that in him, to see that he can still rally towards the end of a fight? That when it seemed that all hope was lost, Joe still bit down on his gum shield, as you say, and still was working to the end and almost forced a late stoppage. How rewarding is that for you, and how much do you think Joe will benefit from that moving forward as a fighter?
Oh, well, I know that Joe has that in him for a start. We've done it before, like he did in the Carlos Takam fight, where we were behind on points and we came back and won the last 3 rounds. He did it in the Andy Ruiz fight, where we had to come back and win the last round. So Joe knows how to, when the pressure's on, he knows how to dig deep. He knows how to find another gear, and I think he showed last night. I sort of, from the end of round 9 onwards, I said to him, mate, I need these rounds. I need you to dig down deep. These are the sort of things that real champions are made of. You're fighting fantastic. You're in a great fight. Now finish this fight. Empty the tank. And coming into the last round, I said, Joe, I still believe you can knock this guy out. He's there. He's there to go. You've got to put 2 and 3 punches together. You're not going to do it with 1 punch. I said, do you want to win this fight? It's ours to win. And we came very, very close.
As you say, you did come very, very close. Something that was mooted in the post-fight press conference with David Higgins is a potential rematch. Is that something that interests you?
Oh, mate, it's too early. It's too early to be discussing something like that. Look, I think this was a great fight for the boxing fans. I think that the feedback that we've had, everyone really enjoyed it. I think Joe's brand grew from that performance last night. A lot of people had questions after the Joshua fight. He didn't engage enough, and I think we saw last night he engaged a lot. He was prepared to move less and throw more and stay in front and throw. It's too early to be talking about next opponents right at the moment. We're going to give Joe a good break. He's going to go home, spend some time with his new daughter, who is yet to see, and then as a team we'll sit down and we'll watch the fight, which we haven't as yet, and we'll evaluate where we go from here. But look, Joe's a 26-year-old fighter. There is still a lot more in Joseph Parker, and okay, we're now coming off 2 losses, but this young man is not the finished product. I think he showed qualities last night that he is one of the elite fighters in the world, and we look forward to much bigger challenges and better fights in the future.
Okay, and just finally, Kevin, so I do appreciate your time this morning. General consensus was that Joseph and Dillian, in fairness, did not need to take this fight. Both of them have a considerable standing in the heavyweight division. With that being said, I appreciate it may be quite raw after the nature of it just being last night. Is there any regrets on your behalf of putting him in with this fight rather than taking 2 or 3 tune-up fights on the back of the Joshua defeat?
No, I don't think we can, because we sat down as a team, we made the decision, we knew there was risk, we knew that there was huge rewards. And, when you agreed to take the fight and sign the fight, you go with it. So, there's no good having regrets.
Okay, well, Kevin Barry, as always, it's a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks very much for speaking to Boxing Social. Credit to you, Joseph Parker, and your team. You're a credit to your country and the sport, and we hope to see you on these shores again soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
Cheers, mate.